Hi grade 12s. Today we're going to be doing a poem by a poet called E. Cummings, and the poem is Somewhere I Have Never Travelled, Gladly Beyond. Please make sure that you've read through the poem at least once before you actually watch this video, because I'm not going to read through it. I'm just going to go straight into an analysis. E. Cummings was born in 1894. But what I really want you to focus on is the fact that he was known to be one of the most experimental poets of the 20th century. And he uses distorted syntax in his poetry. In other words, he messes around with word order. And he also uses quite unusual punctuation and creates new words. And he often actually doesn't use spaces between words or between punctuation. And he is known for not using capital letters in his poetry. Most notably, the use of the word I. He doesn't capitalize the word I, and every now and again when he does use a capital letter, it is something that really needs to be taken note of. The themes of this poem are love and the mystery and power of love, as well as strength in fragility and softness, and a love for nature. And he also kind of explores the relationship between his love for nature and his love for this person, and the comparisons that he sees between the two. So both love for nature and love for this person and their love and power over him are integrally linked. The intention of E. Cummings in this poem is for him to express his love for the person he is writing about. And more than that, he wants to express that despite the fragility of this person, he doesn't perceive them to be weak, but rather that they have strength because of this fragility, and that fragility gives a power over the speaker. And he's not actually bothered by this experience, but is rather in awe of the fact that this fragility can have this power over him. And that is what he wants to express in this poem. The tone of the poem is a combination of bewilderment at love's mysterious power, but also a joyful acceptance of his love and the power that his lover has over him. I've already spoken about the lack of capitalization, specifically in the pronoun I. Also note that the poem is arranged into 5 quatrains, and one of the reasons for this odd punctuation and syntax could be to imply that the speaker cannot express the impact that his lover has on him by using conventional grammar or vocabulary. And I think throughout E. Cummings' poetry, there is sort of the sense of the things that he wishes to express about love or his spirituality or his relationship with nature invariably is that he cannot express it through conventions and proper grammar, because it transcends these rules and laws that are meant to be followed in language, and that his love for nature, his love for God, his love for his lover all transcend this. They cannot be structured through rules and regulations. Okay, so let's jump straight into the poem. In these first lines, he indicates that he's going on a journey, say somewhere I've never traveled. So he clearly hasn't been to this place before. But he uses the word gladly, which means he wants to go where he's going. And then in the second line, he shows where he's going, where this journey is leading him to. And the journey is leading him to this person. And we could kind of maybe imagine that he is sitting, he is staring into this person's eyes, and that process is taking him on a journey. And he says, your eyes have their silence. And so if we think about silence, I'm sure that we can all acknowledge that there is something in silence that carries depth. Very often when we're caught in noisy environments, we're actually not able to really analyze things or go into the depth of moments and feelings and emotions because we're distracted by all these noises. But when we've got silence, there's a depth to it, and we're able to explore really beautiful things. And so he is saying this person's eyes have there's silence. There's obviously a paradox here because eyes don't make a noise. And so he is talking beyond the fact that a mouth makes a noise, and he's talking about how eyes can say a lot, which is something we know. We know that eyes can speak anger, they can speak frustration, they can speak love through how a person looks at someone else. Then he goes on to say, in your most frail gesture are things which enclose me. So there's two things you need to look at here. The first is this concept of a frail gesture. Fragility, frailty means weakness. And yet he's saying that in this weak gesture, it might be something small to be putting a hair behind an ear or just gently touching something. So it might not even be a grand gesture, just something small. And that something small encloses the speaker. So he feels surrounded by these tiny little things that this person does, and he feels safe with those things. And then goes on to say, or which I cannot touch because they are too near. And this is a paradox, because if something is so close, you can surely touch it. So what you need to do with E.E. Cummings' poetry is you need to try and not always analyze the line to the point of knowing exactly what he's trying to say. But sometimes what you actually need to do is try and focus on the meaning or the feeling, the emotion behind what he's trying to say, or the feeling that it evokes in you. So maybe what he's trying to say is this person is so close to him that he's actually one with this person and therefore cannot touch them. Or he's saying that the very existence embraces him and surrounds him, but he almost feels like he can't get close enough. Or it's beyond his understanding. So he can feel it. He knows that it's there. He knows that he is enclosed and loved, but he can't quite put his finger on what exactly it is that makes him feel so comfortable and enclosed. He then carries on with this concept of enclosed and unclosed. It's very interesting. The whole way through the poem, he plays with this concept of being closed and open and covered and enclosed. So keep an eye on it throughout the poem. So he says, your slightest look easily will unclose me. So in other words, open him up, make him vulnerable, expose him. And then he says, though I have closed myself as fingers. So I want you to imagine a fist. I want you to imagine that he has for some reason closed himself up to the world. He's built a wall. Maybe he's been hurt before. Maybe he feels fragile. Maybe he feels vulnerable. And he's saying that this person can just look at him. Not even a deep, intense stare, a slight look. And that slight look will make him open up. That fist will open up. He will no longer be walled up and closed up. And then he compares it to a flower. And he says, you open always petal by petal myself as spring opens her first rose, if you ignore what is in brackets. If you think about spring, spring is this moment in a year when all the flowers that have gone into protection for winter open up slowly. It's this gradual thing that just happens naturally. And he's saying that is how this person makes him feel. It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like he's obliged to do it. It just happens. Skillfully, mysteriously, her look is able to open him up so that he can be vulnerable with her. Note the capitalization of the word spring, all right? Especially because he doesn't capitalize words. And so here, spring is personified, even more than personified. It almost creates this impression that spring is a goddess and that spring has this power over nature to magically make them open. And by comparing this person to spring, especially capitalized spring, it gives this impression that she too has this magical power over him. Okay, then in the next stanza, he kind of contradicts himself and says, well, if your wish be to close me, I and my life will shut very beautifully suddenly. So just like this person has the ability to open him up, she also has the power to close him. if for some reason she feels like, they need to batten down the hatches and close up and protect themselves, then he does that too. And he does it suddenly. He will do it instantly. But it's not a bad process. It's not something that he's got a negative connotation towards, because he says beautifully. He says, my life will shut very beautifully. So he will close down because she has this power over him, and he doesn't feel bad or sad or frustrated about that process. And then again, he likens it to nature and says, when the heart of this flower imagines the snow carefully everywhere descending. So a flower often in winter will completely shut down and bury itself under the ground. The plant might even completely die down and stay dormant under the ground until it senses spring, and then again will blossom and bloom and grow. And so he's saying maybe when cold things arrive or things that cause danger, he will also retract into himself and close up on her sort of instruction. He then again mentions the fragility of this person that he is speaking about. And he says that there is nothing in this world which we are able to perceive that equals the power of her fragility. And he says intense fragility. So that means that this fragility is so powerful or so intense, it's overwhelming. So it's not just a little bit, it really is this overwhelming sense of fragility. And he's saying there is nothing else in the world that can be compared to it. It is the most powerful thing that he can actually perceive. And then he goes and he gives this fragility a tangible quality. So tangible means you can touch it. He gives the fragility texture. He says, whose texture compels me with the color of its countries. And then he goes beyond, because he says color. So not only now can this fragility be felt, but it can be seen because it's got color. In fact, he gives it nationalities. He says the color of its countries. So this fragility suddenly becomes a concrete thing that can be touched and seen, not just felt. And then he uses the word compels. So if someone is compelled to do something, it means they are forced or obliged. And so he's saying that this fragility has so much power over him that he feels compelled. But he doesn't have this negative connotation to it. It's just that it's so real, it's so powerful that he feels like he has no other option. He feels this pulling within him to be overpowered and to do whatever it is that she wishes him to do. He then uses the word rendering. So he says, rendering death and forever with each breathing. And the word rendering has quite a few definitions. It can mean to cause to become, or it can be to provide or give a service, or to represent artistically. So I think it would be good for you to kind of engage with each one of these definitions and see what he, the poet, meant by saying rendering death and forever with each breathing. But it feels almost as if he's saying, when she breathes, each time she breathes, it's so wonderful and powerful that he feels like he's died and gone to heaven. You know, when someone eats a chocolate and it's so good, and they say, oh, I've died and gone to heaven. So maybe each time she breathes, just her existence makes him feel like he has been caused to die and to just exist in this eternity with her. Maybe that's the extent of the power that she has over him. In this last stanza, he closes these 3 lines with brackets. So again, he's doing this enclosing thing. And it's almost like he's quietly saying or admitting this thing that he doesn't know what it is about her that closes and opens. He doesn't understand where this power comes from. But what he does understand is that the voice of her eyes is deeper than all roses. So it holds more power than all roses, almost as if he's saying than all nature. And for E. E. Cummings to say something like this is quite powerful. He writes another poem called I Thank You, God. most for this amazing. And in this poem, he's speaking about how incredible nature is and how awe-inspiring it is. And if that's how he feels about nature, and for her to make him feel that she, in her eyes, has more depth than nature, says something quite powerful and incredible. And it's also interesting that in the second line, he called her eyes silent. And now he says the voice of her eyes is deeper than all roses. And he's not suddenly saying that her eyes make a noise. It's just that what it holds has so much depth. And I can almost imagine him getting lost in her eyes for hours on end. And then he ends the poem by saying, nobody, not even the rain, has such small hands. And so if you think of rain and how rain is gentle but also life-giving, and then the fact that he compares her to this life-giving natural element and says that it is not as gentle and fragile and as life-giving as rain, it shows just how powerful she is and how in her fragility she has this power over him. Before we end off, I just want to bring up that there has been another interpretation to this poem. There are some theories that this poem could also be about a child. And if you look at the poem and this power of fragility over this person, you could very much imagine a mom or a dad expressing this power that this newborn child has over their lives. So I just really want you to be open and willing to accept both possibilities. It is neither one nor the other. It is how you interpret the poem and you justify that interpretation. You need to remember with all poetry, it is about your justification of your interpretation. You can't just say it is about whatever you want it to be about. You need to be able to prove from the poem your theory. Right, grade 12s, I hope you enjoyed this poem. Please also read through the additional notes that have been provided on it and then answer the questions.